everybody. It's Leo, and we have to run our usual audio test. 1 second here. This is Mr. Young, Gavin Young, who has agreed to talk to us a little bit here. Gavin, we're more of a political channel, but I'm a bit of a wacky kind of guy where, I don't really believe in anything, which I think excites people because I've really accepted. Let me check here. Yeah, we're good. I've accepted the fact that we live in the hyperreality. Baudrillard to me, and I mentioned him a lot on this channel, is my favorite philosopher. I think he's the only one that makes sense to me. I saw your videos on him. You did like a whole playlist that was really cool.
Yeah.
And I saw in some comments where you were talking about how other people were mentioning how it wasn't totally life affirming, that Deleuze was perhaps a little bit more, and Nietzsche as well. But before we get into that, just for the uninitiated here, I don't know how to explain this simply. I've tried to explain it to people. You always come off as a bit of a crazy person. So nothing is real. Can you try to do it in like a very simple way for them to understand?
Yeah. So Baudrillard is really challenging the idea of some sort of unmediated, innocent reality. The way the history of philosophy has tried to talk about reality, it's some sort of pure realm of truth, and a light is the way that Plato will talk about it. So all of his allegories that have to do with the light of the sun being the truth, that has been kind of taken for granted in the philosophical tradition. And postmodernists like Baudrillard come on the scene, and they really want to challenge the effects and the results of our technologies and our media, the way that this profoundly has influenced our relationship to those ideas, and in particular that we are now in what he calls the desert of the real itself, in the beginning of Simulacra and Simulation. And he's basically trying to say here that any sort of notion of reality that we now have is at best some kind of open desert where there really is no ground or sense of depth. Our reality really, if we can locate it anywhere, it is in the hyper real. It is what typically has been associated with copies or mere appearances, this sort of surface play below which we might find truth. But Baudrillard thinks that actually those ways that we mediate truth, the way that we talk to each other, the way that we communicate, the way that we write, those are actually more indicative of the reality which would supposedly lie beneath, and really beyond just privileging the cop stage itself in such a way that it hides that there is no reality beneath.
Okay, I get. I've always said I'm a fake anthropologist. I'm not a fake philosopher. So I think that I get what you're saying, and the way that I would put it, I realized I had a friend who bought, I don't know if you remember those 2000s aesthetic lamps that were like a fish. It's like these fish
Mhm.
swimming.
Mm.
And when I was reading and watching your videos in the past few months, and I was like, oh, so this is like six order simulacra, because first you're buying this for an aesthetic from the 2000s. So you're already buying something, yearning for something when things felt more real in your childhood. And when you're buying it, I didn't even realize it until I analyzed it. It's like these fish move around in this lamp because this is the age of, we no longer need the fishbowl because it's too much responsibility. We're escaping responsibility, and now this is a symbol of what would have been. And then the fishbowl was in itself also completely fake because you wouldn't actually ever have this situation where these fish are in the fishbowl. And then you're like, well, then where are the fish real? And you kind of realize the only way the fish are real is if you don't look at them and they're at the bottom of the ocean. Because if you take them up, they're fake. And if you go down to the bottom of the ocean, they're also fake because you're doing something fake to do it. Is that about right?
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting, to kind of take this example a little bit further is, the opponent of Baudrillard might come here and say, well, the real is nature untainted by us. So we sort of kind of privilege the earth as this site of unmediated truth, and then we are the ones who are bastardizing it and commodifying it. But what Baudrillard is trying to say is that the way that humans actually interact with our world, it is so connected and our economies are so implicated in it that, for example, there is no pure untouched nature, really. If we think about the way that fish work in the sea, more often than not, they are being initiated into our economies. We're trying to maintain them at a certain population, so we're always stepping in kind of paternalistically to control minutely the factors of their life cycle. And of course, we're interfering with their environment in ways that are destabilizing them. So Baudrillard, of course, is going to see this to tend to kind of wind down into chaos, because we don't really seem to have a good handle of our hyper realities and our simulacra. But nevertheless, I think Baudrillard is one of the most critical philosophers of this idea that there is any refuge away from our forms of mediation, from the ways that we humans are actually impacting the world, that we are so expansive in our capabilities that we have kind of taken a domineering hand over the world, and we've reached a point where we can't really go back.
Right. I think that going back, that's the hardest leaps for me were the lack of reality and the going back thing. And I found that so interesting because I've always had such a distaste for conservatism. It's just this from Burke onwards, not against right wing. I'm talking about conservative. To me is such a pathetic ideology in terms of we're just gonna we're gonna wait a little bit. You can't. It's not possible. The conversation, the box is opened. It's impossible to do anything. And taking it a little political, going by what you're saying, I see that a lot of people, like people that this channel attracts, they're dissatisfied. They're not happy with the way things are, whether they're on the left or the right. I don't have an opinion either way, and that's fine. That's cool. But what I find is that people don't really realize that the whole thing is at this point completely fake. Like this is ironically the moment where I think people feel politics feels the most real, but it's actually the fakest. If we had like a fake politics index, it would be at the highest. Everything is completely fake, and you can't really I always say this, right? Because Baudrillard always talks about because the material isn't really something that we are motivated by, it seems nowadays. It doesn't seem like people are motivated by, the price of groceries is going up, right? They may say that, but in reality, in hyper reality, they're actually, this guy's giving me a narrative that I like. This is an interesting narrative. This is a good idea. I actually had ChatGPT make I forgot how it said it exactly. I was like, can you do Make America Great Again, but in a postmodern way? And it'd be like, America has always been great. We must have forgotten how great it was, so we must make it great again. So it's like, it's not real, right? It's not something that you can actually improve. In terms of the material, I always say, I'm going to vote, right? Like, I'm going to vote so hard because this is a country where you can get a car loan that's 25% and no one goes to jail. But people are motivated by stories of whether on the left, affordable housing or things getting better. I think Tony Blair in England is the one who was the master at this. Things are getting better all the time. Or from the right, the pathetic cadence of we're going to make it great again. We're going to go back to that. We're really going to go back. And either way, you can't solve it. It's not possible to solve this because we are in a way a victim of it, but you can become a master of it in a sense. I don't know if that made a lot of sense, but like all I'm saying is that I feel like people worry too much about things that are completely outside of not just their control or the people they're electing or invested in, but the whole system as a whole. Like it's not really real in the sense that you thought it was at one point.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the interesting things that Baudrillard sees about, for example, politics, you're talking about voting in elections and things like that. One of the things that he's interested in is the way that this system continues to stage these authentic ideas of, for example, representation, the idea that you can participate in an election and you can genuinely be represented by your government. In representative democracies, this is what the government tells us, that we are the very grounds upon which and the justification for which they exist, that they only exist on behalf of our voice, and our voice is always authorizing them. And of course, if we dig just a little bit deeper and we understand that, well, really power is money and money is power, and things like lobbying organizations have so much more power than any individual or even community of voters, Baudrillard is nevertheless interested in the ways that spectacles form that give us the illusion of representation and the illusion of playing a part in the system. The idea that we have freedom, for example, because freedom would be one of these classical ideas of we have the free ability to search after the truth. And if we engage in philosophy, honestly and dispassionately, then we can reach the truth purely through our own capacities. And Baudrillard wants to see that actually our systems make us beholden to them more than we would like to believe, and therefore it's advantageous for freedom to be touted as an ideal that is actually achievable, but in fact it's more so a hyper reality, a narrative that is told to us beneath which there is no truth.
And I think it is insidious to think that you can affect. That's why I think democracy, I think Churchill's completely wrong. I think it's probably the most totalitarian ideology in the sense of, the person who made me understand postmodernism and its value was there's a writer called Thaddeus Russell. I don't know if you've seen him before, but he wrote this book called The Renegade History of the United States. And it's very cool because he rejects great man theory and says that a lot of social changes came from the bottom. And he's always defended that whole craze where Jordan Peterson and these people were coming out and attacking postmodernism. He was like, no, you're wrong. This is good stuff. You can't escape it. And he warmed me up to it, and it took me a few years to really get it. And it wasn't easy, right? But what he makes the point of is that we are always trying to escape responsibility. And it's okay to do that. In fact, it's normal. It's natural. You should want to escape as much responsibility as possible as a human being. Whether it be, we don't want to think about the food we get, so we go to a restaurant. We don't want to think about the car brand we buy, whether it's good or not, so we read a car brand magazine, something like that, right? And the insidious thing about democracy that I've always found, and I think this goes to the polarization that people talk about now, is that why should I think about the ecological policy of a river in Georgia when I don't live there and I will probably never go and visit it? And now you're telling me I'm the bad guy because I'm not informed on that and voting on that issue. I'm not going and taking time out of my day that I could use for my family to go participate in this fake spectacle. And it just becomes something where people are constantly thinking about things that really have no impact on them. I mean, not the Gulf War. That's how I first found Baudrillard, was reading those 3 essays where he was talking about how the Gulf War was completely fake. And I think every war we've gone into has gotten increasingly fake. I mean, whether it be the war in Ukraine, where now we're using drones to do whatever side you're on. I'm just saying, if you're an American that lives in, I don't know, Jacksonville, Florida, how can you be pissed off and enough to actually go vote based on this thing? Because this war, you don't know anyone that's been injured in it. You haven't participated in it. Perhaps it materially affected your life somewhat, but it's not real. I don't know if that made sense, but that's my problem with democracy, where giving people this fake stake, this fake, you're really going to change the world with this one. It really hurts to see that. And especially when it intrudes into people's personal lives and causes problems within their families or their friendships. And I think that's what's happening a lot more now.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Baudrillard is always communicating to his readers with a kind of probing sense of, do you really believe that anymore? Can you really hold on to this idea anymore? The beneficent government, the free citizen who has consented to the social contract and things like that. I think he wants to see escape and conservatism and nostalgia as kind of all deeply woven ways of responding to the fact that we don't quite believe the things that we tout and that we claim justify our existence. And this turns into the very spectacle you were thinking of, where people become isolated into their sort of local, what immediately concerns me, what is immediately going to, according to my gaze affect my gas prices or the price of my eggs and milk and stuff like that. So it really alienates us. And as a result, we are left trying to find modes of escape, trying to find modes of nostalgia, like you were talking about with these fit, for example. You're trying to match some sort of aesthetic that is going to bring back something which seems to have vitality only because it is now gone. And I think the perfect example of this in Simulacra and Simulation, I've got it right here, he's talking about Disneyland, and he talks about it as kind of the simulacra par excellence. He says Disneyland exists in order to hide that it is the real country, all of real America, that is Disneyland, and its banal omnipresence. The imaginary of Disneyland is neither true nor false. It is a deterrence machine set up in order to rejuvenate the fiction of the real in the opposite camp. And he talks about the fact that people go to Disneyland to kind of role play being a child, to make themselves feel like they're getting away from the adult world, and like the adult world really is where the adults live, and this is where we go to be a kid again. But Baudrillard is saying, no, the real world is basically everyone bumbling around and being a kid, and these sort of simulacra exist precisely to hide the fact that they are the very exemplars of the facade and desert that is the reality we live in.
One of my favorite things about finally having accepted that it's all symbol, that there is no, even if there is not worth chasing the real, was that now I can call everyone else a nihilist for things that would have previously bothered me. So, you see these people who are angry, like, these Disney adults, how do they get happiness out of this? I'm not a Disney adult. I disapproved of that for a long time. And I'm like, you're the nihilist. You're the one telling them that it's not real. Like, they're having a good time. What's wrong with you? What is it really boils down to what are they doing that bothers you so much that you feel a need to say that their thing is fake? Because when you're saying it's fake, so is your thing real? And it's not. It's what is real about it. It's in fact, I don't know if you're familiar with professional wrestling, but reading Baudrillard, there was a famous moment in the 90s where I think it was John Stossel was interviewing a wrestler. And it was when they started saying that wrestling was fake. And obviously it's fake, right? And the wrestler just punched John Stossel in the nose and he started bleeding. And he was like, is that real enough for you? And it kind of goes to, like, especially like you said, like, this is why people don't love him too much, because, he talks about terrorism and all this stuff and how the violence really is the real. But this thing where you could look at something and call someone else a nihilist because they're trying to find a reality where there is none. There is no reality that you can comfortably be a part of. It is truly a liberating thought. Like, it is incredibly liberating. People can take it in a bad way, but I think it's a very liberating way of viewing the world.
Because I think it adds, sort of paradoxically, it adds a sort of magic to our systems, because we realize that the only thing that, for example, makes the economy work or makes representative democracy work is the belief in the value of money or the belief in the validity of representation. These are the only things that keep it afloat, because otherwise, we would all just have our so wished for proletarian revolution where everyone realizes and breaks off the chains. And that sort of fickleness, and yet the fact that it has a hold on us nonetheless, the fact that we sit and watch elections so attentively as if we are the ones validating, the decision that eventually gets made, that for Baudrillard is really interesting.
It reminds me of Noam Chomsky hates postmodernism, and he was debating Foucault, and he's like, no, we have to focus on the material so that we can have the revolution. Foucault's like, what are you talking about? There's nothing real. And I understand why this would frustrate. I don't know. I don't know how someone can, especially after Instagram, after Facebook, after like the full inculcation of the hyperreality, how you can take anything seriously anymore. I think I wanted to ask you this in particular because I can't find a satisfactory answer. So I'm a postmodern Catholic at this point. That's what I describe myself as. And I read that Baudrillard's view was that the apple was the symbol. But I'm kind of coming to the view that even Adam was a symbol that was made by God. And I only bring that up because whenever things are going bad or something like that, I tell people, well, the thing is, like, they were only perfect whether it's literal or not, in the garden. That's the only time things were ever good in human history. Ever since then, it's been bad or less bad, but it's never been good. So I wanted to see if you could enlighten me on that aspect of, because it's in all Abrahamic religions, right? That is the beginning of everything. I mean, was that the real, and was it actually good? Because I used to think that someone can come here and make things good, but I don't think that that's possible. It's a fallen world, just like they describe.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what would interest Baudrillard the most is the tagline at the end there, "It's a fallen world." The fact that we can use narratives like this and myths and stories like this to found entire ways of structuring our lives. The idea that, concupiscence, the tendency towards sin, can be linked to this primal narrative, and we hold it to be so real, despite the fact that its sort of enduring validity doesn't exist outside of the assent that we give it as believers, or the opposite, as disbelievers in that myth. So I think what's interesting for Baudrillard is not whether or not it is true or false. I think truth or falsity is really a false dichotomy. It could as well be an equivalence for Baudrillard. It doesn't really matter what we call it so much as it is its effects, right?
Right.
What does it authorize? What does it validate in our social structures?
Right. Okay. That makes sense. It really is hard to stop chasing the real. It's one of the harder things to do. I wanted to bring this up because I want to get into this particular race, but one of my closest friends, he's actually, I guess at this point, he'd probably describe himself as a postmodern Muslim, and he introduced me. I don't see Baudrillard comment on it, even when he's doing stuff about the Islamic world. But they have this debate in Islam called Kalam, or Quranic creationism, and I didn't know about this, and I was like, is this the original postmodernism? Like this is an insane debate that they're having, which I completely understand. Where my friend always tells me, the advantage that you Christians have is that a Muslim feels guilty because they're not living like Jesus. That they feel bad, but we go, oh, well, he was the Son of God, so I don't have to be as good as the Son of God. But and on that same theme, for us, it's the Word of God through the hand of man, the Bible, and for the Muslims, it's like, well, did we discover this, or is it? It's kind of like what the Greeks, I think, describe logic as. It's like, did we discover this? Was it always this way? I mean, is there any clarity that could be added on to that through Baudrillard at all?
Oh, goodness. See, it's so hard because the way that Baudrillard talks about religion sometimes is irreverent or dismissive. I think of when he's talking about idols at the very beginning of Simulacra and Simulation. And he talks about the iconoclast movement. And, the iconoclasts are coming in and they want to destroy all idols because, it is sacrilege to try to idolize God in that way, to try to depict him or, make him more immanent. It steals from God in a sense. And Baudrillard asks, well, why do the iconoclasts feel so threatened by the icons? If in fact God is transcendent, then who cares the icons that we're making? So Baudrillard says that perhaps there's a secret admission there that the idol reveals the fact that we depend upon these simulacra of God more than the sort of absolute unmediated presence of God himself. Speaking for Muslims, since you mentioned them, I think of the very ritual of doing prayer and doing wudu and doing all of the stuff that entails. That itself is kind of one of the principal ways that Muslims are interacting with God, as personally as one can be. And that itself, you strip that away from the Muslim. You talk about what makes the Muslim who he or she is. Probably one of the core things is going to be their prayer life, that they're consistent, that they do all 5 prayers, that they do it all properly, and they don't skip any steps. And you take that away and you start to realize, well, what is left behind? What is the sort of absolute refuse of God anymore? If we realize that really it's just a hollow signifier, and we try to fill that in with all these rituals, and in the case of the iconoclasts, or really their opponents, with idols. So I think that Baudrillard is very interested in the way that our expectations and our culture of religion is always trying to recursively fill itself in.
Right, right. That's interesting because that was when my buddy and I got really into like trying to, and he also had the realization that I've had too, where the original Wahhabis, like in 17th century, they're like, we're gonna destroy the idols, and it's like, doesn't that make you an idol worshiper in itself by saying that you're ascribing power to the symbol here? It's so much more powerful than God himself that you need to go and crush him.
Mhm.
And it's funny because there really are no sacred cows, and because I saw there was a meme that went around. It happened recently. There was some political problem in Romania, and they sent out a guard with like a modern machine gun, and he's standing in front of an icon of Mary, and it's like, it can't be this fake. Like it can't be. As a Catholic, I'm still holding on to it. I'm like, guys, like, what do we care about the icon anymore? The symbol is completely fake. But there is something human about it, something that pulls you, and I just don't understand it. It seems like we are being tortured in some way. Like it's the worst torture that could be done to the human being to live in post-modernity, because it's not temporal. I mean, there were postmodern people. I'm reading it now for the first time. Don Quixote is a postmodern figure, and that's 500 years ago. And that kind of stuff this really does seem to be a root of a lot of the hell that we live in now, where people can't accept these things, that things are no longer real, but they have to keep going.
Because I think really one of the inaugural points of the postmodern period was Nietzsche talking about the death of God, and the way that he talks about the death of God. He talks about the void left behind and the fact that we are his murderers. And we're still kind of claiming that we as kind of society believes in the ideas and concepts and institutions left over from religion. But then Nietzsche says, well, what do we really put our trust in? We put it in enlightenment, reason, and rationality. We put it in the scientific method. We put it in democracy, which are a far cry from the sort of principles that we see in the Bible or in the Quran or in the Torah. So really, Nietzsche is catching us at this point, and just like Baudrillard saying, well, what do you really believe? Let's look at how you really act, and where do you really put your stock? And as a result, I think the postmodern period is so difficult precisely because there's always a tension to the past. The past is always there, but it's as a flat, empty, desert-like presence. It's not something that we have some sort of intimate or genuine contact. I believe we probably have always thought that way. We've always wanted a more intimate contact with the past. Maybe that's a sort of enduring aspect of the human condition. But nevertheless, we're trying to wrestle with God, with institutions, with government, and all of these in a way that just seems to be forestalling their own death. It's like we're denying that the death has already happened. It was already dead.
Right. I think that is one of the things that's contributed to this like schizoid thought, is what you're saying about being in touch with the past, which I really think that the advent of photography, before that writing, but photography in particular, it was so dangerous because it really makes you think that you are interacting with the past. One of the moments that I found most interesting, I followed it. I don't know. I think I was at work and I was bored. So they had the Rittenhouse trial. Remember that kid that in 2000, I don't know when that was probably like 4 years ago at this point. And despite how anyone feels about that trial, one of the more interesting moments in that trial to me was when they brought on a photo expert, because the prosecution wanted to pinch and zoom on an iPad to point something out. And the expert came in and he was like, listen, this is going to be very difficult to explain, but when you zoom in on a picture that's taken digitally, it's fake. Like what it's filling in, like it's not the actual thing. And as someone who had a background in photography, I found it interesting because this is something I'd always wondered, right? Because that film for lack of a better word, is real. Film is an actual capture of the moment. It will look bad and remain looking bad. But digital is like even faker, and video was fake, and now I'm like, why isn't every criminal using this to get off at this point? This is awesome. I would question literally everything. I'd be, Judge, how can we be sure this video is real? Because this is just another cope, another attempt to go say, oh, we really know what's going on, but it's not actually what went on. It's up to interpretation.
Yeah, I think that makes me think of this passage, which is on the second page of Simulacra and Simulation, and it seems to me emblematic of what you're saying about photography. I think it's almost as if he had photography in mind when writing this. He says the real is produced from miniaturized cells, matrices and memory banks, models of control, and it can be reproduced an indefinite number of times from these. It no longer needs to be rational because it no longer measures itself against either an ideal or negative instance. It is no longer anything but operational. And I think, not only does this work for photography, but it's even more potent for thinking about like AI art, right? It no longer needs to be rational because it no longer measures itself against either an ideal or negative instance. We look at some of these pieces of AI art, especially the sort of spoofy ones that are like, I don't know, a screw turning into a cat, or like a painting turns into a river. And you're like, what is going on? This is like so uncanny and disturbing. And yet we still keep sharing them, and we still, keep motivating this economy of AI art because we're so fascinated with it. Because, just like people were fascinated with photography, it's this totally new medium that's kind of stretching the limits of credulity. And okay, what do we really believe is real right now? Because now we have to question the very notion of authorship and how we would ascertain authorship. I think also in universities, the AI assisted writing softwares are making it increasingly difficult to figure out how do you really know that someone has authored their own work. So these very basic ontological questions, because of media like this, and this is exactly what Baudrillard is so good about, is getting to the very heart of the breakdown of modernity, getting us into this hyper reality.
And before we take it like full into like what current events and all this, I think that his prescription was you either fall into it entirely, like you completely drop the real, any attempt at it, because I think he still believed in language is somewhat real. I've seen him talk about that. You drop all that and you're like, I'm going to learn English. It's a new lingua franca, maybe Mandarin. Going to get a nice little wagey job, go to work, and going to get, just fall in, right? Just fall in. Or you can rebel, which is futile and stupid, and you don't win. Or you can like self-exile, right? Like you can really, reading him, I was really like, man, the Unabomber was like almost there, but then he had to go and do the spectacle. Like if he had just left into the cabin in the woods and never come back, and maybe like they discover the manuscript 20 years later and he hadn't done anything else, it would have been something else. But the spectacle, which is part of rebelling, will always be fake, and you will always suffer because of it. So you can either just leave, be a hermit. But what I find more fun, and what you're saying is, I was always a fake Luddite. I'm like, oh, I don't like this new tech or something like that. And now I'm like, no, give me the new tech, because otherwise you will get left behind. Like you will get left behind. And if you're comfortable with that, go buy a shack in the woods and go live out there. Like that's just the way I'm seeing it. Is that an accurate view of what the options are in our current state?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of, Baudrillard is kind of one of these foundational figures of accelerationism, and key for Baudrillard is this idea that we really, because we don't have the option to go back, all we can do is sort of up the ante. I think, again, of another passage in Simulacra and Simulation, where he says, capital was never linked by a contract to the society that it dominates. It's a sorcery of social relations. It is a challenge to society, and it must be responded to as such. It is not a scandal to be denounced according to moral or economic rationality, but a challenge to take up according to symbolic law. So this idea of the challenge, of confrontation, this is something he's taking from Nietzsche. Nietzsche is talking about, experiment and the will to power and whatnot. And Baudrillard is kind of taking this to the max, and he's saying, okay, we kind of have to go full force into this. And it doesn't mean that, you become so open-minded that your brain falls out per se. But Baudrillard, like you, is really trying to revolt against conservatism. Oftentimes it's unclear whether or not Baudrillard is conservative in his leanings or whether or not he's more progressive. But I think fundamentally, at the end of the day, progress is all we have. But it's a progress that's always spinning out of control, right? You think of, what does it mean to be a progressive? This means to be part of a culture which has certain expectations that you're falling in line with, and certain things that one is supporting. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that progress is happening with or without you. And, just like with voting, the election is happening with or without you. And so really, all you can do is, you can vote if you want, you can not vote if you want to. It's not making a lot of difference, and yet it's almost as if we are sort of condemned to be free, kind of thing.
Right. I like the way you put it, because my buddy visited the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and he found a quote of his, which, reading Baudrillard, I really understood it, where he said, the businessman must always be progressive. And, this is like an oil baron, heartless guy who let his son get his ear cut off by the Italian mafia. I understand what he means. If you are going to materially improve in this hell, then you must embrace it. You must really go balls to the wall with it. Otherwise, why even be here? It's not fun.
Yeah, it really is, stasis is death. That's sort of motto or credo of the postmodern period.
Now, to take this, so I don't know if you followed this race. It's interesting. I'm from Miami. I don't particularly like New York. It's a fine place for a few days. It smells pretty bad, and I don't like it too much. All right, but I've been fascinated with the destruction of the Democratic Party, which is the oldest political party on the planet at the moment. And I have several theories about why this is happening. I'm not a Democrat. I'm an ultra Democrat. I guess we could say that, right? A real Democrat, right? And I'm looking at this party, and I'm like, what's wrong with this party? This party, are they on the take? What's the problem here? And so suddenly, a few months ago, I saw this guy, ZOHRAN MAMDANI, pop up on social media. And as soon as I saw him, my first impression was this seems a little self-serving, maybe a little sociopathic, but every politician is that way, inherently. And then I was like, no, I whether I agree or disagree is irrelevant. I was like, this guy is probably going to win, because this is the first politician, maybe I was too young for Obama, where I was like, this is someone who has embraced the tools of the hyperreal before they have been tamed, in particular TikTok and Instagram Reels. And I was like, this guy is actually, these are films that he's making. This is not crap. These are actually well thought out. His mother's a film director, so it's not unusual. And all I saw was this cynicism from the other opponents that were saying, oh, he's good on TikTok. And I was like, this is, so what's real, man? What's real, Andrew Cuomo? What do you have to be good on to win? Is it Facebook or is it door knocking? Because to me, it seems that this is the world we live in now, because a president was elected that tried to ban this because of how hyper real it was. Mm-hmm. And so this is the first, perhaps Donald Trump in other ways has done it, but in modern terms, I'm seeing someone who can really, in this sense, hack the hyper reality to steer the whole ship. Would that be that archetype of person? Is that something that we've seen before? Someone who can come in and just embrace it hard, pretend harder than they do, and take over?
Yeah. I think it's interesting how, even Trump, when it came right before his own election, he was showing up on podcasts and stuff like this. He's trying to cash in on the communication that is the backbone of our society. We're so wedded to our technology that it does isolate us into these sort of miniaturized cells that Baudrillard is talking about. And as a result, of course, all the stuff that I and probably you know about Mamdani is not from seeing him in person.
Right.
It's not from, I think of Harding, who did his campaign speeches from his porch, and people would come to his porch in the thousands. Like we don't do that anymore. I mean, it was rare when he did it, but it wouldn't even be feasible or imaginable for a candidate to do that anymore. They're using social media. So social media is, this platform par excellence, not to sort of derivatively, oh, they're just good on TikTok. Like if they're good on TikTok, they're going to win because TikTok is a huge platform.
Yes. And as someone, the only thing I believe in now that's left for me to believe in, really, besides Catholicism, is power. That's the only thing that I think we can believe in. And when I see someone who is cultivating power in an effective way, I can only admire that. I can't be angry at it. Even if you disagree with them, I don't care. At least someone is taking this seriously. And I think one of the unconscious draws that people have to this candidate is I saw him doing an interview where he was talking about how he was going to do something with education. It's really irrelevant, the issue. But what happened is that they were asking him who the responsibility lies on, and at the end he said, the responsibility is mine, I will be the mayor. And this reaching out and self-assigning responsibility, I think that this is something that's lacking. And you saw Trump do this as well, where he was like, however people feel about it, dictator on day one, I'm going to do all this stuff. But people respond to, I think in a world that's so fake, someone who's saying, no, I'm going to be in charge. You're not going to be in charge. You're going to be down here, and I'm going to be up here, and I'm going to tell you what to do. And there is something to it where people go, okay, this is nice. I don't know if it breaks the totalitarian democratic mold when I have to be thinking about this all the time, and now I have someone who gets to do this. But what would be the explanation for that? What draws people to someone saying, I'm going to be in control? I'm going to be your father, someone in charge?
Yeah, I mean, I think in part it gives us the illusion that control is just over here in this one locus, that we as free citizens are authorizing that it only be effectuated here, that it only be enacted here, and that it's on our behalf, right? That the control is only happening in the government, for example, when we know, in fact, that it is diffused all throughout the economy and the way that we communicate, and the very technologies that legitimate our communication, that allow it in the first place. So this attraction to people who will step in for us paternalistically, right? It's a sort of infantile desire, if we really want to get Freudian about it. I mean, it's a sort of regressive desire to have someone step in for us precisely and only insofar as we allow them to. So it gives us the sense of control in relinquishing our control to someone else who controls for us, right?
No, it's sad to hear because, I'm Venezuelan through my mother's side, and in Venezuela, we had a tradition in the 30s for like 20 years of positivism. And there's a great book called Democratic Caesarism that came out of this, where this writer, Lanz, was explaining the national character of the Latin peoples in general in Latin America and Venezuela. He was saying, well, look, the reality is that we are a people of despotism. We crave it. We need despotism, which is not unusual. If you read Marx, the Asiatic mode of production is despot. And he's like, despotism is fine. This is not... This goes to what you said earlier about freedom. This freedom illusion in the United States and the Anglo world broadly, this is not a problem for other cultures. So despotism is fine. We're okay with it. The only problem we have is despotism without consent. But the consent is not really a vote in our cultures, is what he's explaining. He's saying, no, it's really... Like, he gives the example. One of the Venezuelan national heroes is called Páez, and he led parts of the revolution against Spain. And someday after, civil war and things were going bad, these two farmers were having a land dispute. And they just went up to him and they said, hey, can you tell us where to do the border? And he was like, I mean, I'm not a theologian. I don't have a theodolite or anything, but sure. And he did it. And they respected the authority inherently. And he went on to become president. It's just this unconscious thing where people relinquish the power in a way to... I don't know. Sure, it's comfort, but there is also some material benefit, I think, from this sort of thing. Uh,
Yeah.
there is material benefit in the other direction as well, but I don't know. It just seems to me to be much more when you know someone's in charge, when you actually get to feel the real, which is pain or violence or something. At least, at least North Korea is more real than New York City. You know that like that. It's messed up, but these people they don't have to suffer in the same way. It's another form of suffering.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because, the way that we've historically talked about this, um, this person in power who steps in and takes the reins would be like Hitler, right? There's a power vacuum, and Hitler steps in and he uses ideology and he tricks the masses. This is the way that it's told. But if we think about the desert of the real, then the power vacuum is really all the time. It's always a vacuum demanding more and more ideology and demanding people to step up. And this gets to the point where it reaches a symbolic equivalence, as Baudrillard puts it, where it doesn't matter who it is. It just matters that they're um, assenting to certain codes. We see this in like the podcast space where people will step in as an authority figure. You've never heard of them. They have no academic credentials whatsoever. And yet they talk with that authoritative voice that historically we've seen great leaders talk with. And we assume that because they know the lingo, because they have the cadence and the rhetorical flair, that therefore well, I guess we should authorize them because the people who have talked like this in the past are my parents or my politicians, the people that I've always trusted. So I think really we're seeing that what Baudrillard is trying to say is that all we have is not a concern for content, but a concern for the form of the codes, the way that they are enacted and the way that actors step into them, into the power vacuum, which is constant, to try to fill it up, to try to make it feel whole, like we have some sort of great society. I mean, this is why Trump wants to make America great again, because he
Right.
wants to take the power vacuum that everyone feels because everyone knows that they don't have power anymore. And Trump claims that he can take that fist of power and he can do something good with it, right? He can fill that power vacuum with all the platitudes and all the extremism that he has. In the same way that Hitler used his tactics, it has worked for Trump.
Right. I'm glad you brought up the podcast space because it's interesting because I always try to do like a meta review since this race started of how this guy is being covered, Mamdani, right? And a tactical mistake that I saw immediately, because like you said, I assume a lot of these guys are experts in business or something, but they're idiots when it comes. One of our favorite punching bags here is Patrick Bet-David. I don't know if you've heard of this man in Fort Lauderdale. Trump went on his podcast, and the first day after Mamdani won the primary, immediately was he is a communist, jihadist, Islamist, and going to the depth of meaning, at least to someone like me, these words mean something. If you're calling him a jihadist, you're saying he's sympathetic to Al Qaeda. If you're calling him an Islamist, that means he's sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood. like these are big words, you know. And immediately I saw a tactical error in going. So basic psychology, we usually go foot in the door, but if we're gonna go door in the face, you better have some real stuff to back this up with. And ever since then, now they're like, he doesn't pay good rent. His rent controlled building is messed up because he's too rich for it. And it's like, you already called him a member of Al Qaeda, dude. What am I? It doesn't make sense. You know,
Yeah.
I just wonder because I see him as this, not in a negative connotation, slippery figure, Mamdani at this point where like they're trying to like stab him and he like moves out of the way. But I don't even know
Yeah.
how he's doing this and what would compel these other people to think that this is a good strategy in creating this symbol of Mamdani, the evil Muslim crazy communist that's going to destroy New York City and America by proxy.
Yeah. I mean, I think the fact that in so many ways Mamdani breaks the hegemony of our political system because he's a person of color, because he's a Muslim, because he's a younger man, he's a departure from the norm in so many ways. And as a result, the character assassination that we're seeing is part and parcel of the way that hyperreality is working for Baudrillard. Because, I mean, take this accusation that he's a jihadi, for example. What does that immediately hearken to for most Americans? 9/11. And I was driving on a random road in the middle of flat cornfield, Ohio, and I see 9/11, never forget, on someone's fence. Who all is going to see that? Maybe 3 people a day or something like that, if that. And yet someone thought it was so important, and they probably don't even know who the people who committed 9/11 were, and yet they have the visceral association of that memory. And as a result, the sort of accusation of being jihadi is part and parcel of, oh, I can fling around just intense associations and I can win you over with this idea that they are jihadi. And yet if you ask those people, well, what does jihad mean? They probably couldn't tell you.
And what's interesting is, I don't know if you're familiar with Adam Curtis, the BBC director. He does a lot of good work. He did this documentary that's on a lot of these themes called hypernormalization. And actually, I think it was an interview he did where he was talking about the Thatcher government in England. And he said that the problem with, I don't know if Baudrillard ever said this in particular, but he said, look, the problem with necromancy, with bringing the past to cause the future, right, is he says, look, for example, when Thatcher came into power, Thatcher grew up under Winston Churchill. And what do we know about Churchill in that era at this point? We know he gave the empire away. Regardless of what it is, the empire stopped at Churchill's point. It was just the reality. And he says, but when she was growing up, Churchill was making all these speeches about, we are Britannia, we control the world, and she really believed it. He said, this is the problem. She really believed it. And when she became the prime minister later, she sold the empire away even harder because she started selling the post office, the trains, and all this because she really believed this. You're bringing up the past and you don't know where it goes, because when you create an image in someone's mind, a symbol of what you are, you really open yourself up to do a lot of things that will hurt you in the long run. I don't know in particular what this is, but bringing up 9/11 implicitly in this thing, you're conjuring up images of something where, I mean, quite honestly, people could get shot, people could die, people could actually get hurt because you're bringing this up. This person, not the symbol of Zohran Mamdani, the actual person could end up in serious physical harm because of this. And you don't know what that actually does. Or even further, you could actually create the event, because now, let's say he wins the mayorship, which he probably will. Now, they said this was going to happen. Why would a group not make it happen if you said it was going to happen?
Yeah. Because, I mean, you think about the fact that he's being called a jihadi is just an emanation of Islamophobia. And yet the phobia, which, this would be the response to the real for Baudrillard, the reality that lies beneath that, most of these people have never met a Muslim in their life. So the reality, the supposed referent that this copy would refer to, that we could say that, I'm being Islamophobic for good reason because I know a lot of bad Muslims and they're always bad. No, they just have this vague aura of, what do Muslims do to us? What do they do to us? So, you bifurcate into these two camps. And I think that itself is exemplary of what's going on in this political back and forth between Mamdani and Cuomo right now. Is they're just polarizing themselves into these opposite poles where each one is the devil trying to assail them.
Right. And it goes to also the economic, calling someone a communist is a specific accusation. This is not...
Yeah.
I don't know. My theory is that, since there's a lot of boomer vote, they're trying to bring out this image of, especially with and he helped play into it in an extent with these pilot grocery stores that are supposed to be for the people. When you say that, I can bring up red lines, I can bring up the Soviet Union, I can bring up Cuba, things that boomers remember as something that I mean, they never experienced it, but that's what they saw as children, right? That's what matters. Mm-hmm. And when you say, every billionaire is going to leave the city because Zohran Mamdani gets elected, I'm kind of, to me, it's either some sort of sabotage attempt in terms of going, you are going to create this hyper reality by speaking it. I don't know if Baudrillard ever spoke on that, but once you call something, my buddy told me that in California, there was a tree that was like 500 years old or something like that, a super amazing tree, and they discovered it and they gave it a name, and a week later it burned down because it got struck by lightning. And this sort of thing where when you give something a name, when you make it something real, it is much more likely to actually happen, for something to happen to it. I mean, is that something that, I'm not saying that they're geniuses or anything like this, but that they could be tapping into even unwittingly, where you are creating a hyper reality to sabotage someone for no reason.
Yeah. I mean, when you call Mamdani a communist, for example, your very utterance brings into reality, for Baudrillard, the communism which it is supposedly, fighting against. All of our politicians work this way, where you say a name and you've never heard of that name before, and you try to investigate them by doing what? By figuring out the labels and the names that you can apply to them. And, you talked earlier about, for Baudrillard, language having some sort of reality. I think that's right, because I think language is one of these key conceptual schemes. It's the way by which we mediate reality. There is no unmediated access to reality for Baudrillard, and as such, what's more important is the ways that we try to copy and represent reality to each other. So in this case, the reality of Mamdani and who he is. I mean, especially with politicians and celebrity, who they are is not meaningfully distinct from their spectacle, because that's not what's important for them. What it means to be a politician is to be equivalent to their spectacle. It's not you get these very genial images of a politician who, for example, lets you into their home, and the camera is panning around and you're seeing their home and you're seeing, oh, this is the person beneath. They're doing that precisely insofar as they make the banalities of their life political. So they're not escaping the political, they're just enlarging the political and giving us this sense of depth, which is in fact just the political pulling in more information and more stuff. So I think what is so interesting about Mamdani, and what is really tapping into his ability to master these codes, is he is such a genial guy. I mean, you look at Mamdani and he just seems like he would be a great guy to talk to. And I don't think you can say that about a lot of politicians. I mean, it surprises me, because there is a significant portion of our population in the States that thinks that about Trump, who just seems to me to be the exact opposite of that. But nevertheless, you look at Mamdani and he seems to be such a genial guy that he seems to break down the facade of what we expect our politicians to do, to be just greedy, surface level, power hungry people. He seems to be penetrating beneath that, and that therefore becomes his most effective political strategy.
Right. I mean, I think another example is Bush Jr. Bush Jr. And it really is. It's funny because it's it's like a Dark Knight. It's like if a truckload of soldiers blows up, it's fine because it's going to plan. I mean, that's what George Bush's presidency was. But, he won because he's a great guy to get a beer with. And his rehabilitation, which I never thought I would see in my life, which is currently underway, he's a nice guy. He's a fun guy to hang around. This guy's a murderer. He did a lot of bad stuff. But it just goes to, like what you're saying about the politician in itself and the spectacle not separating. In particular, this is where I'd go a little deeper, and this is why, I have some Mamdani supporters. I have a lot of Mamdani supporters that tune in. And this is not to make them feel bad, because I don't like to take away people's hope. And I don't know how to replace it with them, right? Where, look, whether it was Trump or whether it was Mamdani, if you vote for someone because you really think that they are going to improve your life, okay, I genuinely, sincerely hope whatever you vote for, you get exactly what you want out of it. I really do. However, I made a video probably a few months ago where I was talking about after Trump won, I was like, Donald Trump cannot fix this country. And what I was saying, and people took it as nihilistic or something, I said, look, if housing got cheaper, if I could buy a house for $100,000, if I could get a car for $10,000 at a 10-year rate on a 2%, okay, and I can get married and everyone loses 30 pounds and everyone's in shape now. Magic wand, all of this, all these beautiful things. I don't care anymore. And I think a lot of people implicitly or unconsciously are there, where, especially after COVID, which launched us into like a whole other level of hyperreality. If Mamdani makes your rent cheaper, if he, I don't know, if he makes the bus better, let's say everything goes exactly according to plan, you will still be left, and perhaps it will even be bigger, with a sense of emptiness that everyone is dealing with now, where people are coping, in my opinion, going to, oh, my material conditions improving will improve my life. And I'm like, well, have you been to Iceland? Have you been to Norway? Like, these people are not exactly happy. Like, they say they are, but they're not exactly there. I mean, what is the solution to that for people, if there even is one? Because I don't think putting stock in, if Mamdani wins, my life's going to get so much better, especially if you're putting more than 5% of your time into that. If you put 5%, okay, that's a good wager. But it seems like a lot of people are putting like 90 to 100% into that. And I fear their disappointment in the same way that I've seen a lot of people disappointed with the Trump administration or with Biden before that. And it's like, I'm sorry, but you should have known it was a scam from the start, because the hole inside of us is much deeper than just the material conditions around us.
Yeah. And I think the point I'm going to make here is honestly a bipartisan point. It's really besides the point. We could be talking about any election race here, and it would apply. But the way that elections are won and lost, it itself is a sort of Disneyland, the likes of which Baudrillard is talking about, where it is a way for us to retreat, and the American dream of, oh, if my candidate wins, they're going to do all the things right that you're saying, and my material conditions will be better, and now everything will be fixed. This idea that we can authorize a figure that can do that is neglectful of the structures that be, of things like capitalism that are so entrenched in our political and economic system that any candidate in either of the parties, and this is why I'm not a Democrat, is going to support capitalism. So at the end of the day, we see that both of these polls are circulating around capital, such that really what this whole system is revealing is, just like Disneyland, that America runs on false promises. It runs on giving us the illusion of choice when in fact it lives off of our ability to assent to promises, and as the system fails us time and time again, to assume that another candidate is just going to make it all better. Now, I don't think this means we need to be resigned about every candidate. For example, if I were a New York voter, I would be voting for Mamdani. And yet I wouldn't assume that he's going to be one of these people that is just going to fix everything whole cloth. I don't think that any one politician has that capacity. And I think the reason that politicians can win so often is because they're great at giving us that illusion that if they did win, they could do that, that they could suddenly fix everything. And in one term, I mean, this is what Trump is trying to do with his very radical restructuring of US politics, is he's trying to do everything in this 2024 term. He's trying to restructure all of the executive branch and the way it works and the way that the legislature works, and he's trying to mobilize the National Guard. So he's totally trying to raise to the ground and do what we claim that our politicians can do, which is fix things. And Trump is just going to kind of go in gung-ho and, oh, you got exactly what you wanted for. The people who voted for Trump well knew that he was going to be very radical. That was his very platform, is that I can be this person who can really institute change. And has he changed things? Yes. For the better? I don't think so, but that's up to the viewer to really decide. And yet, nevertheless, he is a sort of indicative symbol of the kind of trust we put in our systems, the stock that we put in the ability of our systems to do things and to change things.
And it's interesting you say that, because you're right, like things have changed, but also the inflation is still here. Like the material promises
Yeah.
The most important ones to someone like me are
Mm-hmm.
still here. So the changes, okay, they're real, right? But let's be in my case it's different, especially like in Miami, right? But most people don't know someone locked up at Alligator Alcatraz. Like they don't know anyone there, and they're caught up in this. And I'm like, can we get the eggs down $1? Like, can we? It's not out of nihilism or anything. I'm saying, we can focus on this issue, sure. But I was promised cheaper eggs. This is what I really, I don't vote at all. But I was like, at least we're gonna get the cheaper eggs. At least the eggs will be cheaper, and that hasn't materialized.
And the Republican Party has always won on this front. Is the way that the parties have been told. To me personally, as someone who became a new voter recently, is if you want social change, you go to the Democratic Party. If you want economic change, you go to the Republican Party. And this has always been their thing. And yet ultimately both parties are failing to deliver on these economic promises, because those are the hardest ones to solve, because they're so intimately wed to capitalism. And like I said before, neither of those parties are going to challenge capitalism in that way. So why aren't the egg prices going down? Well, most Americans think they know why, but really it's because of capitalism. And that's frankly not going to go anywhere with either party.
I will say, because I'm not a Marxist, and I'm not a capitalist, but I always use the term liberalism more, because it seems like Fukuyama really cursed us by speaking it into reality. Like, we live, everyone, no matter any political extremist, it's like in Russia in the 90s, the fascists and the communists are together in the Congress mad at Yeltsin, and they're getting bombed, by the liberals. Like, the liberals are here making our lives hell. Like, the liberals will not, and not like, I mean literally liberalism, not the boomer version of liberalism. We live in a liberal, fundamentally liberal, open society. And I think that it creates a lot of dissatisfaction in the way you're saying, where it's just, it can't be this way where, okay, you say capitalism, I'll accept that, right? But there's a film called, it's a Cuban film, it's very good, and they do a scene where they're doing the trial for the people that did Bay of Pigs, right? Mm-hmm. And this is a critical movie of the Cuban government, but it's made in Cuba. But even here, they criticize capitalism in probably the most interesting way. And I think liberalism at large, where they go, watch, they just did this attack. They failed. And when they came in, someone was in charge. There were sergeants, there were generals. Now, when we're there on trial, no one is in charge. And they play real recordings, and they're like, well, look, man, I was just the guy bringing the food rations onto the shore. I wasn't the one doing the whole invasion. Oh, I may be the general, but you think I'm telling everyone to shoot at the Cuban army? Oh, you think it's in this diffusion of responsibility is just a total hell that liberalism creates, where you don't know who to blame. And in fact, that's where I find liberation in Baudrillard. It's stupid to try to find someone to blame. These young people that are mad at the boomers, I'm like, you know what? Someone was going to do that anyway. In fact, the boomer is always there. Time is a flat circle. Like Nietzsche's right. This is always happening. So how can you even be mad at them for it?
Because I think important for Baudrillard is this idea that we relinquish our classical notions of agency, that there's any one person responsible. Baudrillard is trying to say that our simulacra, these self-referential models of technology and communication and information, our models control our reality more so than our reality does dictate our models. So our simulacra have stepped in for us, and they claim that we came before them and we authorized them. Whereas in fact, most of us have been born into democracy, or we've been born into the West, or we've been born into neoliberalism, for example, and we're thrown at the feet of this, and we didn't really decide it, and now we're left to kind of pick up the pieces rather pell-mell.
I recently heard someone say, I forgot who it was, where they were talking about, because everyone gets blamed, it was like a Gen Xer, and they were saying, they tell me I shouldn't have voted for Ronald Reagan. I was 6 years old. It's my fault. This is the way things are. Like, it doesn't even make sense. Like this search for I don't know if there's like a philosophy word for it, but blame, like responsibility. It really does. I don't know, this politics of resentment and this politics. to go on a wider point, like something that's really bothered me about this New York race is that I've seen this from the opposition, which is unusual. You usually expect it from the new dark horse candidate, right? Where they are playing the politics of slaves, of Spartacus, of please, but like, I don't like it. It's begging. And when you're begging, you're losing. It is the weakest form, not to go too Nietzschean, but Andrew Cuomo there, yesterday we saw him begging the audience to care about the poor homeless mother that cannot sleep at her rent-controlled apartment because Mamdani is in it. So please vote for me. And this is not speaking from power. This is how a slave begs for power because they have no other recourse. But these people have recourse and they choose not to use it. And it's like the opposite of the politics of resentment. Like, how does anyone think that could be effective? How that could work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because we have a historical example not only in our contemporary politics with the rise of the right, but historically we have Harding once again, and Harding's campaign slogan was a return to normalcy. So his response to the radical politics, this is in the 20s, the Socialist Party in America has never been more prominent than it has during Harding's time. And Harding comes in with this sort of begging, let us come back to normalcy. Let us not worry about revolution, but the maintenance of the norms and whatnot. And it's a sort of begging on the knees, the likes of which Nietzsche would call ressentiment, the sort of resentment that happens from the slaves, right? The people in the lower socioeconomic positions who, instead of asking for great revolutionary change, would rather just accede to the powers that be. They would rather accede to the status quo, and they would ask for a return to normalcy, that revolution is bad, even though revolution would serve them well if there was some sort of radical change that was happening. No, radical change is hard. It's easier to just beg and be like, please, just let things go back to the way they were. I don't like you coming in and upsetting things.
But it's so, I know exactly, but to me, seeing Andrew Cuomo do this was like, but you're the millionaire. You're the guy whose brother worked at CNN. Like, how can you be doing this? This is like a total inversion.
And yeah, I mean, you have to think that that's what conservatism itself is. Conservatism itself is asking, please, I know you have all these new ideas, and frankly, I just don't want to listen. So can we please just go back to the way things were? Can you just put a pin in that for now? And I promise something will happen. Just don't do that.
No, that is a perfect summary of conservatism. It's really, and that's one of the interesting things, tangentially related, but the campaign I always go back to because it was a big part of my political formation was watching the movie No. I don't know if you've heard of it. It was a Chilean film about the plebiscite in Chile. For anyone who doesn't know, Pinochet had actually a fair vote to see if he should remain as dictator of Chile. And the movie is from the side of the opposition. It was saying, oh, let's, you had these naysayers saying it's not going to be fair. Let's not even try. And then you had a couple of guys who had worked at marketing companies and they said, no, we're good. We can win this. And they were like, well, how are we going to win this? Are we going to trash talk Pinochet, say that everything was bad? And they're like, no, not at all. No, what are you talking about? We're going to do like bright future. Like everything is going to be great. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be the best time in Chile's history. And they're like, but this is fantasy. Like in the movie, they portray people as getting insulted by this. And it's like, no, but this is what Mamdani did successfully. This is actually what Trump and Obama did successfully as well, where it's like, I am going to present to you. Trump's is a little weird because it's recursive, but Obama's and Mamdani's, it's like, no, it's going to get better. It is actually, I'm not even going to talk to you on the terms of normal politicians. And that's why his silence has been very good. He doesn't respond to these petty scandals or anything like this. It's just, hey, it's going to get better. Like, I am selling you a whole other vision of the future. And people choose to believe it because it is the most attractive narrative. I mean, what other narrative can Andrew Cuomo sell you or Eric Adams sell you?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's so interesting to me how the opposition reacts to Mamdani with such intense scorn, calling him a jihadi and a communist, which, especially to them with communism, I mean, this is the deepest insult you can give someone politically. So there's such a struggle to stay within one's camp and be unwilling to listen, frankly. And if this person is giving promises, I mean, both parties are giving promises that both people would generally like. Oh, I'm going to make prices go down. Oh, I'm going to make it easier for you to buy a house. Oh, I'm going to make our country great. This is being very reductive, but both parties are making their own both demands and promises that people would generally be okay with. Now, I think there's a lot of stuff with Trump that many people would not and should not be okay with, but nevertheless, they're both making promises. And Mamdani comes here and he's trying to tear back the facade, and he's trying to appear as, and I think successfully so, as a soldier amidst these assailants.
Right. And what's interesting is he also does this thing that I find so fascinating, where the real is fake, but he goes to the real more than they do. So I don't know if Baudrillard said it himself, but I kind of made like a Baudrillard bot in my chat GPT to ask questions to, right? And one of the not aphorism, like one of the phrases that came out with is pretend harder than they do, right? And when they asked on stage, they asked every candidate, where would be your first foreign visit? And doesn't matter what they say. They can say whatever they want. I don't have a strong opinion on the Israeli conflict. They could have said, I'm going to Venezuela, to Mexico. And he goes, I'm going to stay right here. And I'm like, this is like ultimate troll behavior. This is awesome. He's like, no, this question, I reject it. But I reject it on the base of reality, where the reality is I'm going to be here and you're going to be away by answering the question.
Yeah. And I think that's something so interesting about Mamdani, because, when Baudrillard talks, he has a whole book called Fatal Strategies, the point of which is basically the phrase that you were saying, that you must double down. If reality is being beat out with hyperreality and phantasms, then we must hyperrealitize and phantasmatize even harder. We must accelerate this process, because it will lead to something new if it crumples under its own dynamics. And Mamdani is kind of caught between this, because it's a question of when to play the game and when not. And in this case, when to respond to the question on its own terms and when to deny the very terms of the question. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer. I don't think that Baudrillard is saying that we should resign from systems altogether, that we should denounce all games, because that, for him, there is a pleasure and a servitude in that renunciation. He talks in Simulacra and Simulation about people going to pirate radio, that resorting to these grassroots radio stations that get away from all the hustle and bustle and the conglomerates and whatnot. And he says, no, that's an attempt to escape, which gives a certain validity and primacy to what is being escaped. And I think in the same way, Mamdani is always kind of in the middle of, when do I play the game and when do I deny the very terms upon which the game is being played? And we saw from the way that he had this intense vitriolic reaction by his opposition that, oh, he's not going to do his foreign visit. He's not going to go to Israel. It's like, well, a mayor shouldn't really have to do that. They should be concerned with their own place. But this is the rules of the way the game works. You do your visit, and his not even participating in that game was itself a challenge of its own.
I feel like there's, like you said, there's those two directions, right? Where you can either pretend harder or reject the game. And the other one is, okay, and like immediately book a flight to Tel Aviv and start running for mayor of New York there. Like start posting on TikTok. Do it, like pretend even harder, And that goes to one of the other people that really helped me understand the value of postmodernism was there's this guy called Cody Wilson. I don't know if you've heard of him. And he's the guy who invented the Ghost Gunner. Like it's a milling machine so that you can make an unserialized firearm legally in certain states, right? And he invented the Liberator, which was the first plastic pistol. It wasn't even the first one. And he's a huge fan of Baudrillard when he did it. He was very inspired by Julian Assange, and he wanted to do something to challenge the state in the hyperreal, right? So he made this plastic firearm. And immediately all the news was they're going to sneak this into airports, and he's just sitting back. And then a journalist snuck it into the Israeli Knesset and wrote a story about how they snuck it into it. And he was like, I didn't have to do anything. The Hyperreal did it for me. And the reason I bring that up is I think that the final stage for now that I haven't seen Mamdani do that would be super cool if a politician started doing it is if they really started engaging with it as totally playfully, right? Where, Patrick Bet-David's going to say, I'm a jihadi. I want all my supporters to rent out a space and open a museum to 9/11 Part 2, which happened under my administration. We're going to open it now just to get ahead of the story. And immediately it's like, what the fuck is he? I mean, are those strategies effective?
Oh, yeah, it's really hard because, on the one hand, there's that keen interest that we have in those people that push the rules of the game by twisting them in interesting ways. I think that's so interesting that, I think of 3D printers being so popular and the fact that, oh, someone could become a terrorist by using weapons made by a 3D printer or something like that. Or let's say maybe one day a AI runs for president and we vote the AI into the presidency or something like that. That is taking this sort of the limit cases of the game and just plugging it in and seeing what happens. And I think Baudrillard, in a sort of nihilistic way, is sympathetic to that. I think that he sees something cheeky and potentially revolutionary in that. When he talks about terrorism, we get this sort of sense of the way that he almost accedes to terrorism and gives it its own validity or its own new reality or primacy. But honestly, I don't really have a good answer.
It's interesting because that was I had this thought after I started talking about it where they're calling him a jihadi. Like when I heard that, most people are associating it with Hamas. I'm not sure if, I'm sure that's a jihadist organization technically because for me at first it was confusing because Zohran Mamdani is a Shia Muslim and there is no jihad in Shia Islam. So I was like, okay, this is an odd thing to call him. Do you call the Ayatollah jihadi? Probably not. That doesn't make sense, but all right. But I thought immediately of Al-Qaeda, right? I mean, that's the most important jihadi organization and historically. And the president of Syria, he's recently gone. He's a former member of Al-Qaeda. Like he's wearing a suit. He's well-groomed. He's like a Obama jihadi, right? Like he's like the new man of the Al-Qaeda. And he's embraced by the United States, by England. Alistair Campbell's over there interviewing him. And I go, this word has lost all meaning now. Like this is completely fake. And if you're trying to scare me by calling someone a jihadi, I question your sanity now because I'm not even endorsing it. You have endorsed this position. This position is now endorsed by the real people in the world, the people, the presidents, the vice presidents, the former. And so it's just funny to notice because Baudrillard obviously died in the mid-2000s, but even what he saw as somewhat real, jihadism has been commodified and resold to you in the system. It's completely fake now. And it's just funny to try to see people reach back and use rhetoric from like 2004 for something that I don't know how anyone that watched what happened in Syria could say, oh yeah, jihad, that's something America really cares about because, the president of Syria is now... I'm not saying I like Assad. All I'm saying is the former president was an Al-Qaeda member. So what does that leave us with,
Well, because I mean, the haunting underbelly of jihadis, just like for all terrorists, is that in the proper proportions, it is profitable to the powers that be. We know, for example, that before 9/11, the Mujahideen was funded and trained by the U.S. government because they were fighting Russia. So the Afghanis were funded by the U.S. and they used much of that training and those weapons to help start Al-Qaeda. So lurking just below the surface is the fact that terrorism is often very beneficial to the powers that be as long as the powers that be, like America and their hegemony, know how to terrorize better and can sort of terrorize the terrorists, and therefore they will legitimate someone like Assad.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you said in hypernormalization they get into that, but it's so funny the contradiction you bring up, because I brought it up too. It's like, so you're calling him a jihadist communist? If we go further back, like trying to chase the real even further, what you just said, like they were killing the communists. so, and it's funny because my same friend, he gave me this interpretation that in the Arab world they have of the Iranian Revolution, where they say that, I don't know if this is accurate, I haven't checked it out myself, but he says that a lot of people, what they think is that this was like a commie LARP revolution that they tried to have, and then they had to wrap it in the cloak of Shia Islam because it wasn't going to work, which reminded me a lot of the revolution in Nicaragua. The Sandinistas were founded by an atheist, by a Stalinist, and only after he died and someone came in and said, no, we can be Catholic communists, did they win. So, it's just these contradictions. I don't think that these words have a lot of value anymore. Like, I think that and that's where I disagree with him on language, where when I see Zohran Mamdani being called all sorts of, you can't even say they're nasty words because they're no longer nasty. They're surgical. They're tame. They're boring. All these words have lost their meaning. In that case, I mean, you can't even attack them on those terms anymore. You can't do. I saw Bill Maher. This was interesting because it really pulled back to exactly 2004, where he said you have to tell Democrats that if you're with Zohran Mamdani, you're with them, meaning the terrorists, or you're with us. This is George Bush. This is Bill Maher has become George Bush, and this is awesome. Like, we are really testing the limits here of what can happen. Because this old rhetoric, I don't know if it's a generational thing or something, but is it just dead? Is it gone? Can you not attack Zohran Mamdani with the same language of 20 years ago?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the attacks are always problematic in a sense because they assume some sort of continuity that Mamdani is the same as those that the rhetoric has been used upon in the past. But I think that there is the reality of what Mamdani is facing. And the whole reason that he is so successful is because Mamdani is basically the greatest success story that the Democratic Party has against Trump right now, in terms of the biggest successes in government of getting into positions of power, getting very large support bases in a very short amount of time, is Mamdani. So people are just sort of latching on to him. Not to say that his policies are bad at all, but it's a significant fact of his campaign that he's railing against Trump, and he's taking the people who are dissatisfied with Trump and bringing them, I would say, rightly to his side. So I think that the dismissals of him perhaps neglect the fact that all of his successes are really an indictment against Trump and his failures.
I think actually the way I've taken it is it's more of an indictment on the Democratic establishment, is and that's what I found so interesting in the race, which is that, especially because we watch a lot of Fox here, because there's a lot of alpha from Fox. You can learn a lot watching Fox. And they are consistently attacking Mamdani, right? They're saying, oh, Mamdani, he's going to destroy New York City. And what I don't understand is, if you are Fox, and I don't like to give people free advice, right? But let's just do it here it's Fox, right? The Democratic establishment, to the whole country at this point, whether you're right or left, is clearly evil. Like, it is seen as an evil thing, whether it's because they don't deliver or because of your views on foreign policy. No one likes it. No one is like, oh yeah, I'm excited to vote for Chuck Schumer again. No one is happy about that. And to quote Nietzsche, that which is falling must be pushed. If Fox News were intelligent, instead of attacking Mamdani, I would see them attacking the establishment with him, the Democratic establishment, either to get some excitement because you get to have Mamdani in, or you get to push your own people. But this would be the way of playing the game that I see, where, because I bring it up because you mentioned these, I don't know if you mentioned it directly, but these copycats, we've seen these guys, we covered them on this channel, like Omar Fateh, that are like taking after Mamdani, and it's interesting, but I don't think they really get why he won in a lot of ways. They don't get that it's beyond just making TikToks. First of all, they have to be good. A lot of people make bad TikToks. It was something else, but that little viral thing, like viral idea, this inception that has been put into everyone's mind, can really destroy this establishment. And I just don't understand why a Republican, a Trumpist, a democratic socialist, an anarchist would not cheer this on. This is beautiful. It doesn't matter how you feel. This is awesome. It's over for them.
Yeah, I mean, it brings me back to what Baudrillard was saying about iconoclasts earlier. I mean, why would you be attacking the idols if the idols don't actually have any power, if they're not actually assailing God? I mean, in the same way, if
sorry to interrupt you, they are literally giving him power. They're saying we saw a clip of Fox Business where a guy said that the market tanked on the same day that Trump announced the tariffs because of Mamdani's speech. And my conclusion is, let's have him run for mayor indefinitely and talk good so the market goes up forever. This is what we're assigning to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that there is so much pushback, of course, only helps Mamdani, because it gives the sense that there is some sort of vitriol and that the vicissitudes really do entail something new that's happening. I think if he wasn't such a big threat, if he didn't represent such a stark opposition ideologically in many ways, he wouldn't be railed against in the way that he is being.
I think that I'm glad you said that, because the system's most punishing punishment, I think, has always been, it's harder to do now, but it's ignoring, right? It's to shun, to not address. And it's hard to do now. That's, I think, one of the reasons Mamdani succeeded is because he hijacked social media to use it for his own purposes, which is very smart. But, this shunning, it hurts people because it's probably the most effective strategy. And, if I were the opposition, there's a clip that went around of Conan O'Brien's podcast where he has a comedian on. Obviously, it's comedic, but it's funny, where he says, Jeffrey Epstein died. And the guy goes, "You mean the financier?" And this is after it's been in the news and everything. And he's like, "Yes, Jeffrey Epstein, the sex trafficking." He goes, I would know. I haven't spoken to Jeff in a while, but I would know. And I think that, it's ironic, it's funny, but if Andrew Cuomo really wanted to win, it would be something like, they ask him about Zohran Mamdani, he goes, I'm not aware of that candidate. If you could, could you refresh my memory as to who he is? Actually exist as if he didn't would be a more effective strategy than begging and like attacking and doing these little snarky bites.
Yeah, because I mean, now we're just seeing Cuomo sink deeper and deeper into the fact that he's losing, and even the positive attempts to recuperate his race only accentuate the difference that has arose between Mamdani and himself more and more, that he's basically just digging his own grave at this point.
Yeah, and it's glorious to see. It is really, really funny. I really, I'm enjoying it here. I know it's getting late, Gavin. I just wanted to see here, we have one of our chatters here that asked if you like the book Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. I haven't read it,
Yeah,
but you do a lot of philosophy, so I assume yes, right?
yeah, that was like my big light bulb moment in terms of the depth that philosophy could reach. The phenomenology is just crazy in its depth. I have serious philosophical disagreements and or reservations about Hegel and about the phenomenology in particular now, and yet nevertheless I respect him tremendously as a figure. He just creates this entire, he's perhaps the last systematic philosopher who comes up with this intense system for accounting for reality in a way that I would say is self-serving, and yet because of that, it's fascinating.
Is it worth reading, or is it very difficult to read?
It's one of the most difficult books in philosophy to read. I think it's worth reading, and I think it helps that I read the famous A.B. Miller translation, which was translated in like the 50s or 60s, I want to say. So it's very, very dated. Now there are a lot more. There was just one that I think was published recently in like 2015 by Oxford, I want to say. So there's lots of more updated translations that make it easier to read, and I would imagine would make it an easier process. But it's still very convoluted, and Hegel's notoriously not polite to his readers, and it's sort of in the way that postmodernists are, but in a different way.
That's cool. I'd ask you a last like meta question here, which is I think a question that everyone, whether you're on the left or the right or wherever you are politically, is on everyone's mind, which is and actually it's not. That's the problem. Where Mamdani, to me, one of the things that I find frustrating is that he's a democratic socialist, right? Like he's a member of this organization, the Democratic Socialists, and I'd like to escape the 20th century. I would like for us to do something better, whether it be capitalism, socialism, communism, distributism. These models, they're so boring to me. Like it's been done, and I feel like, especially millennials, they say they don't want to live in boomer hell, but we are living in boomer hell because this is what boomers were fighting about at the dinner table in the 30s, in the 50s, and their parents in the 30s. And can we escape the 20th century? Why are these things so? It's just so boring, Gavin. I can't stand it, man. Like, and then they attack him for using the word, and I go, then why even use the word? Let's make it more exciting. Let's get rid of it. Let's do something cool, But it seems like no one can escape liberalism, or it's like, inarguably, whether you're a socialist or even if you're a fascist, you have to admit these things failed. Like they failed. Liberalism swallowed them whole and spit them back out. So it's like, how can we break free of liberalism? Can we win?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the great challenge for Baudrillard, and the reason that he sinks his theory, the teeth of his theory, into the things he does into these recursive accelerationist strategies, is he recognizes that it's not so simple to escape the 20th century, that the ideas and all the events were really culminations of much larger historical continuums of modernist ideas, philosophically and politically and aesthetically and morally. And as a result, what option do we have when things like capitalism and liberalism and now neoliberalism are so strong that they have become the status quo, and the status quo dictates even the margins, that the margins are not able to escape the dynamics of a past that is returning with a vengeance? I honestly don't have any good solution, and I think this is the point where theory and praxis meet, and where we can talk about solutions in the abstract, and we can we can theorize about what our better society would look like. But at the end of the day, I think call it what it may, I care about the results, and I think that you want to call yourself a democratic socialist versus a social democrat, for example. Those obviously entail different things theoretically, and therefore presumably would imply different things in praxis. But what's really interesting for me, and what is really going to make or break what our future looks like, is that we don't pigeonhole ourselves in too far to the platitudes of, oh, you're a communist, and therefore I've defined you. You are a democratic socialist, and therefore I've defined you, and therefore I know your stuff is not going to work. I think I would take very seriously the imploration of Nietzsche that we experiment, that we treat philosophy as an experiment where praxis meets it.
I think that someone who actually excelled in that was Milton Friedman, who's like beloved by libertarians. But if you actually read him, like Friedman he totally embraced the black box. Like he did not care what worked or didn't work. Like he was like, hey, we do this. We have the interest rates here. It's working till it's not. When it's not working, we change it. It's all I forgot. Isn't it like epistemological? Like it's literally empirical. It's all empiricism. It's like what we can measure the material results. This is all that's going to matter. It's just, I don't care. Deng Xiaoping. Whether it's a white cat or a black cat, as long as it catches mice. Like this is the where we're at now, where I think a lot of people are not attached to these labels, but unfortunately, a lot of them still are. And I wish that if you could shed them, you
Mm.
know, it brings to mind there's this play called The Killer by UNESCO, who wrote Rhinoceros, which is he was in a French absurdist, and it's this person called Bergeron who's in a city called the Radiant City, and it's beautiful, and he's immediately introduced to the fact that there's a serial killer and he's killing people in the city, and he shows them the picture of the colonel, and then he decapitates them, and he's just like, why would he do it? The whole place, why is this going on? And then at the end he confronts him, and the guy doesn't give him any answers, and he's like, oh, I guess that's just it, you know. And this is the situation I think we all find ourselves in, where we're like, but I don't care what you call it, as long as it works. Can we do it? Because Baudrillard said this about China, apparently, where he was like, they are the real masters of the hypersimulation at this point. They are the ones that can deliver. And I've been to China, and to me, it's the safest country I've been to in my whole life. And it was nice. Not for me to live in, but it was really nice. It's a lot better than Shanghai's a lot better than New York. It's a lot better than Miami.
Yeah, and I think it's important, crucially important, that we don't therefore become irreverent to labels. For example, I think it would be irresponsible to treat fascism and social democracy as equivalents of one another. Of course, they're going to entail different things in theory and in practice, but I think it is important to realize that, call oneself what one may, you're right that the empirical is really what should be guiding us, and the empirical doesn't exist all on its own. It exists because of the fact, like we've been saying, of the consent of the people who authorize the economy and politics.
Unquantifiable data. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's important that we stay vigilant of these labels, but we don't give them the value of platitudes, the kinds of things where once they've said, we've pinned someone down. I think that is the irresponsible take, and that's what Baudrillard is trying to do, is getting underneath just the mere names of things and trying to get at their structural dynamics. What are they telling us about what we claim lies beneath, but in actuality is merely what motivates the surface play.
Right. I would say on that last point, because we have a Stalinist that watches the show from time to time, and I'm not a Stalinist myself, but I have a lot of interest in that. You know, he called the Social Democrats social fascists. You know, he hated them. The Second International he sent agents to Germany to eliminate them. You know, because he was like, these guys, they allow things to get so that Hitler could be elected, right? And in a certain way, this is a warning that Stalin left, that Uncle Joe left, which I think is real for any political ideology, where it's like you have these characters, and whether you support them or not, and again, I hope everyone gets whatever they want, but if Mamdani improves your material conditions, and let's say you're left wing, right? There's still a lot of problems. There's still alligator Alcatraz. There's still climate change. There's still coal mining. There's still a lot of problems. And this is a numbing agent, which in some ways kind of allows for your political enemy to do whatever they want. You know, it's not a... I don't know. I'm just not... Baudrillard has made me fall out of love with the material, right? Where I'm like, the material in some way seems to me like a lulling trap that can lead to negative results.
Yeah, I think it's important that we temper what we claim our systems can do. I think Baudrillard wants to show that while we claim that the copy is hiding the original beneath, that appearance is concealing the truth that lies beyond, I think Baudrillard wants to show that if we take this sort of hyper-real revelation that he's trying to bring to us, if we take that seriously, we need to understand that the structural dynamics that let a system like the economy and the government and society at large work, that is larger than any one person, and that while politicians claim that they can get it all done in one fell swoop, we need to realize that all the meaningful change that can happen is not on the scale of the grand narrative. This is what postmodernists rail against so hard, Instead, we have to realize that at best the political changes are going to be small. It's not going to be that suddenly, everything goes away in one fell swoop, but it may just be the small, gradual change and improvement of material conditions. And I guess really that's all we can hope for.
Right. And I will say, because I understand why he hated the film The Matrix, and the position that I kind of see you're advocating here, which I do see as interesting, which I have come to from another perspective, is that the real hero, the real villains in that film are Neo and Morpheus. The real hero is Cypher, where this steak is fake, but I'm going to enjoy it. And you know what? Maybe if this vote is fake, but this voting feels good, man. It feels good, and like this Mamdani administration feels good. I mean, maybe in some ways you do become the hero of the story doing that sort of thing.
Because I mean, it's a sort of pragmatism where one just faces the results, and okay, who cares about the giant truth that lies behind? I mean, what does truth matter in the Matrix? You're given the option of the blue or red pill, and Cypher's, oh, I wish I had taken the blue pill, and he willfully wants to go back in and get all of his memories erased and whatnot. And the film wants you to be like, no, the truth is valuable in itself. You should want to be outside of the Matrix just because you're in it, and being oppressed like that and not aware of everything is bad. But I'm with you. I mean, Cypher is the hero because Cypher realizes, what does it matter about truth if we're living in absolute squalor outside of the Matrix?
Just one last question for real this time. The only thing is, what I'm struggling with is that it seems like the only things that are real are like violence, pain, and reproduction, like bringing a child into the world. And I see in Baudrillard, he still wants us to pass on, even if it's fake, a bit of the real, right? We pass on some of the real. I mean, in the political context, right, this would be like, say you're uber left-wing, having a red diaper baby, right? Now, we know that this doesn't matter, like passing on language or passing on, I for my whole life, I was like, oh, I want my kids to speak Spanish so they can keep it and, be Catholic because it's, hundreds of years, And now I'm like, I feel like it's just such a disadvantage to give anyone something that's even close to the real, because it gives them this false hope. It gives them this search for something that doesn't exist. I mean, what is his best argument, or what you take away from it, for why should we even try to preserve the real at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think Baudrillard's problem is trying to trace what are the traces of the real any longer. And I think, when he talks about hyperreality, oftentimes he talks about the hyperreal as being more real than real. And I think ultimately that's where he's finding the refuse of reality, not in some sort of amorphous beyond the unmediated, the form of truth as such. He wants to see it in the down and dirty of our fantasies and the things that we take for granted, and the things that we let slip when we want to accuse someone of something. I think he wants to see that as itself an enduring tradition that will get passed on, just because the social is so incredibly powerful that we really can't help but reproduce those slips and those things which get taken for granted. And I think one has to be careful when reading Baudrillard, because one can be tempted towards resignation, right, that we just throw our hands up. I think it's unclear to what extent Baudrillard is doing that. I think in many ways he is throwing his hands up, and in many ways he's turning that into a dive and trying to dive deeper into the system. But I think it's important that we take this idea of the reality that he's giving us, and the hyper real, which he says has kind of taken over, and maybe which has really always been there, that we take that with a key grain of salt.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate this, Gavin. Where can people find you and check you out?
Gavin Young Philosophy on YouTube.
All right, man. I appreciate this a lot. Genuinely, I can't say I had the same anxieties as a few months ago, because I kind of let it simmer and I get in, the world we live in, or the fake world that we live in. So
Yeah, I'm glad, man.
I appreciate it, man. And all right, guys. Sorry we didn't get to chats today, but I'll see you guys tomorrow for our regular show. And please go follow Gavin. I'll put I didn't link you in the description. I will actually do that. I'll link you in the description, man.
Sweet.
All right, man. I appreciate it.
Change the world.
Thank you, man.
Right, no matter.
Yeah, no problem.